Come on in, pull up a chair and take a load off, because today I'm going to share a Kickstarter preview of Unforgiven, the Lincoln Assassination Trial from Green Feet Games. And I'll be diving in right after this. Howdy, gang. Yes, I'm Jeff McAleer, back once again as your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. As I mentioned in the open, I am going to be sharing a Kickstarter preview of Unforgiven in just a moment. But first, I do want to remind you, if you like this video, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already, and if you do subscribe, ring that notification bell, because it will not only let you know when I upload videos such as this, it'll also tell you when my live stream, The Daily Dope, airs right here on YouTube, Monday through Thursday nights, as I bring you the latest in tabletop gaming news. Of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all the latest in gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Before I jump into my preview, I do want to mention that neither I nor anyone else associated with the Gaming Gang has received any sort of compensation to provide this Kickstarter preview. Granted, I did receive a playtest copy of the game, but outside of that, no other compensation. It's important that you know that, because yes, there are other outlets out there who receive monetary compensation to provide their thoughts on various Kickstarters. I do not do that. So it's important to know, essentially, I have not been paid to share positive thoughts on Unforgiven. That said, as I mentioned, we are going to be taking a look at Unforgiven, the Lincoln Assassination Trial. It is from Green Feet Games and designed by Tom Butler. The game is for 2 players, ages 8 and up, plays around 15 to 30 minutes. This Kickstarter is going to launch, or at least is scheduled to launch, on October 6th. So let's move on over to the other camera, because I've got Unforgiven set up. I am going to discuss what this game essentially is. What does it represent historically? Going to talk a bit about the gameplay, some of the mechanics, the components. I am not going to do a very, very detailed how to play, simply because I know there are other videos out there that are going to provide all the nuts and bolts for you. I don't expect you to sit through multiple videos telling you how to play the game. That said, I will discuss some of the gameplay and really get into what my thoughts are of Unforgiven, the Lincoln Assassination Trial, which from here on out I will refer to as Unforgiven, because the whole title is a bit of a mouthful. So essentially what is going on here is one player is going to take on the role of the prosecution. The other player will take on the role of the defense of Mary Surratt, who was arrested and charged with being a conspirator in the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln. It's interesting to point out that this was a military tribunal. This did not take place in a civilian court, even though Mary Surratt and the other conspirators were all civilians. Reason behind that was that even though the South had surrendered, the Union still felt that they were at a state of war when the president was assassinated. It took place in Washington, D.C., which they considered to be a military zone at that time as well. So it was a military tribunal, so a bit different than a federal or civil court would be as far as the trial. You are not representing all of the conspirators. You are only representing Mary Surratt, who owned the boarding house in Washington, D.C., where the conspirators met to plan their assassination, as well as other assassination attempts. Some people may not realize that the night that Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, Secretary of War Edwin Stanton was attacked, as well as there was a plan to actually assassinate the vice president as well, Andrew Johnson, his assassin actually chickened out, where Stanton was actually attacked and he was gravely injured. He did not die, but he was gravely injured. So the setup of the game is there's card drafting, there's resource management, or spending resources, essentially. We've got various different dice we're going to use as resources as well. There is a tug of war going on as far as the reasonable doubt track that we've got here, as well as bringing jurors over to your side to convince these jurors to either decide guilt or innocence. And there's a lot of moving parts going on in the design, but they all fit together really, really nicely. So essentially, you're going to set up these cards for a trial phase. I am going to zoom in. We're going to get a better look at some of this. I will mention that this is a playtest copy of the game. So some of the cards are a little dog-eared. There's some chipping on some of the jurors. The board is in beautiful shape. So keep in mind there's some dings because this was a playtest edition and it was played, I'm sure, loads and loads of times before it made it into my hands. So if you do notice a little bit of little boxing on some of the cards, little chips, things like that, keep in mind this is a playtest copy. This is not a beta or anything like that. It is a playtest. So you're gonna set up your trial phase. There are 3 phases to the trial. There are 3 ways to win the game as well. So you may not necessarily have to go through all 3 phases of the trial in order to determine a victor or essentially a verdict. So the card drafting aspect is you're going to set up a diamond here. So you're going to have 5 face-up cards. Then you're going to have 4 face-down cards on each side. Then you're going to have 3 face-up cards on each side, 2 face-up, I should say face-down, and then a face-up. So essentially what happens with this diamond is as the players are drafting these cards, you're going to unlock more cards that can then be drawn. Once you've actually drafted all of these cards, that phase of the trial will end and you'll move on to the next phase of the trial if someone hasn't already automatically won the game. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to zoom in because we're going to get a closer look at some of the aspects of the game. And I am going to actually move this over a little bit so that we can see more of the board. Because we'll have the prosecution side, which I've got right here. Up there is the defense side. We don't need to see both at the moment, but I do want to give you a better look at some of the aspects of the game. So we have 9 different jurors. Keeping in mind, this was a military tribunal. These are all officers in the military. In fact, we have Major General Lew Wallace of Ben-Hur fame. So you may not realize Lew Wallace wrote Ben-Hur. So we've got 9 of these jurors, and you're going to start off. You're going to shuffle up the jurors, and then you're going to take 6. You're going to deal 3 to the prosecution. You're going to deal 3 to the defense. And for an example, I would say have 3. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to take 1, and then I'm going to pass the other 2 over to the other player who will do the same. And then from those 2, I would select 1. Then I would hand that last one over to the other player. And then it would actually end up in their area where this is a deadlocked juror. So you're going to have 2 jurors who are already leaning towards you. They're already leaning towards your argument. So you're going to have them available to you. There are various different resources in the game. I've got some of the dice showing some of the resources. One thing that's very cool The dice are really nice. They look like they're laser printed. Each of these dice is not going to be the same. So we do have different dice. We have more dice as well that we're going to keep in a draw bag. And we're going to randomly select 5, roll them, and then the prosecution and defense will take turns placing the dice along this track here. The 6th one is going to go here on the reasonable doubt, next to the reasonable doubt track as well. So what you're looking at, one of the ways for an instant win is to convince 4 jurors of either Mary Surratt's innocence or her guilt. If you're able to do that, then it's an instant win. To convince jurors, once they've been won over to your side, you need to pay the cost of that juror. You will also get some bonus resources or a special ability that'll take place as well. Some of them are one-shots, some are ongoing. But to convince this juror, once they're on my side of the board, once they'd be on the prosecution side, I would need to spend 3, this is national interest, as well as 4 sway. Sway is a common resource that you're going to utilize quite a lot in the game. And you'll have things where you're paying sway to do things. You can pay sway to take these dice. So you're going to have a lot of various different things that you can do with the sway. Sway is not actually on the dice there, but you do earn sway from different things. Discarding a card that you draft is one example of how you can gain sway. So I will show you what these resources are. So we've got national interest. This is a wild card. So essentially with this die face up, you can count that as any die face. This is a trial point. If you go through all 3 phases of the trial, whoever has the most trial points is going to be declared the victor. This is eyewitness testimony. This here is the gallows. This is what we move the reasonable doubt marker with by spending this. There are other effects as well for some of these dice. We have basically an appeal to emotion, or what the little hearts represent. I already mentioned that this represents national interest, and this is an appeal to logic. So as you're playing, each turn, you're going to draft one of the cards that's available to you, and you're going to have an option. If you can pay the cost of the card, and the cost of the card is right down here, you can add that to your argument. So I will just, let's zoom back out just a hair so I can kind of show you what we're talking about here. You're going to essentially have, I'll push this up a little bit. You can have your jurors that are leaning towards you, and then you're going to have cards that you're going to add to your argument. There's a bit of an engine building aspect to Unforgiven as well, because once you have cards that you've added to your argument to strengthen your case, you're also going to be able to utilize their special ability. It might be something that allows you to collect one of these resources every turn that you can spend. It might be something that you have to spend sway on in order to get a special effect or resource or whatnot. So that is one of the options. When you draft a card, if you can spend that resource that's on, or the resources, because some have much higher costs, then you can add this to your argument. We do have different color coding codes, not coating codes, to these cards as well. So to give you an example, this is a fact. This is Lincoln's chair, where President Lincoln sat on that fateful night of April 14th, 1865. We have white cards, which are evidence. We have gray cards, which are appeals. We have blue cards, which is reasonable doubt. We have black cards that are rhetoric, which might give you kind of a special ability. Once again, we have the fact, and then we also have kind of a golden border, and that is the press. So we have all these different sorts of cards, which I think is very cool. It could easily just been, all right, well, here's all these different cards. But the color coding gives us an idea of, okay, so what did this represent? Oh, okay, so this is eyewitness testimony. Oh, this is evidence. So for an example, if I had drafted that card, I would then have flipped these cards over, and these two cards, as well as the one card that's over there on that side of the diamond, would be available to my opponent to be able to draft. So one of the things we can do is we can take that card, spend the resource we need to add it to our argument, and voila, from that point on, we now have this card as a part of our argument. Now, you're going to find there's going to be a lot of times where you don't have the resources to spend in order to add this to your argument. So next thing you can do is you can simply discard the card, toss it on over into a discard pile, and you'll gain 2 more sway. So you can do that. You can end up adding more sway, and you will need to do this because you are constantly burning through sway. So it's important to keep in mind that you'll be able to get the sway. You can discard a card to persuade a juror. So persuading a juror, we have 3 jurors here who are really undecided. So if I draft a card, I can spend that card because I'll say, okay, so I want to persuade an open juror. These are open jurors. If I can spend these resources, either these resources here, or you're going to randomly take some cards from the 3rd phase of the trial, and you're just going to show off their costs. If you can pay these costs, one of these costs, you can also do that to sway a juror your way. So as an example here, if I wanted to try to sway the Brevet Brigadier General James A. Eakin, I could spend, 2 appeals to emotion to move it down here, but I could also spend 3 sway, or I could spend 1 logic, 1 emotion, 1 national interest, or of course, we also have 2 emotion, 2 hearsay, which is hearsay is another evidence kind of resource. So we have a few options. If I can move them to this point, once I spend this, then they will actually become a convinced juror and they will go to my argument. Remember, one of the instant win conditions is convince 4 jurors. You can also utilize the card, discard your drafted card, to convince an available juror. The 2 jurors that you had to start the game with become available jurors. So for an example here, if I had 3 national interest as well as 4 sway, he's already on my side. He's leaning towards me, to my argument. If I spend that, then he becomes convinced, and then I now have whatever special effect or resource, whatever may be on top of the card. So for an example, he would provide 7 trial points. So a very good juror to have if we were to get through all 3 phases of the trial. Other way that we can win is if we move the reasonable doubt, the justice marker, which is pretty cool. It's the scales of justice. If we can move it all the way down to our end of the track, we automatically win. So there is a back and forth with this as well. So there's a tug of war here. There's a tug of war here. And then, of course, we're also trying to maybe bank away some trial points as well. Couple other things here. So we see that we've got these other jurors here. So if I'm able to move the justice marker down to that point on the track, that unlocks this. This is a deadlocked juror. It's going to unlock that juror, and he's going to go to my available jurors. He's not convinced. I still have to pay that down here in order to convince him, but he becomes available to me. Other aspect of this track that I thought was interesting too is if, for an example, I unlocked Brigadier General Howe and the defense is able to move this back past 0, back towards their side, then they actually get to claim this die. You can always spend sway to also claim dice as well. The power that any time to do any of these things, you have to spend your drafted card. So you're not going to have tons and tons of cards as part of your argument because you're going to have to spend cards in order to convince jurors to move these jurors closer to your side, as well as use this to buy dice. It's basically, you can power other actions with your drafted card, or you can pay the cost of the card to add it to your argument. So, once again, if you're basically looking at the game here, 2 ways to win. Convince 4 jurors, just like so. That's an instant win. Be able to move this all the way down to your end, instant win. If that does not take place, you're going to actually go through your trial phase 2 cards, trial phase 3 cards, and if you go draft all of these cards and you still have not hit one of the 2 instant win conditions, then you're going to tally up all of your trial points to determine who's the winner. And there are tiebreakers as well, in case you both have the same number of trial points. And there are a few different tiebreakers. And if you're tied after all of those, it's considered a mistrial and nobody's won. All in all, that is pretty much how you'll play Unforgiven. Now, do want to point out, as you collect these different dice, if you get multiples of these dice, they can give you some special abilities. So if you have one of these and you spend it, it moves this 1. But if you have 2 of the gallows and you spend them, it actually moves 3. If you can get 3 of them, you can move it 5. So that's pretty wild. With these trial dice, you can actually have multiples of those if you have them at the end of the game, and those will give you a bunch of trial points. You can also have these wild cards. These wild cards are pretty cool. If you have 3 of them, you can spend all 3 to immediately convince an available juror. So there are bonuses to collecting multiple dice. We do have extra dice, as I pointed out. And like I said, they're not all identical. So we do have extra dice. If you find that there are no dice available, because if I take this, I replace it with another die from the bag, roll it, and put it there. If you happen to run out of dice, you don't have any more dice left in the draw bag, you just leave that empty until somebody spends their dice. Now, if they don't spend their dice, then that spot's going to be empty. I found this also very interesting, the dice here, because the closer the dice are to you, the cheaper they are for you. So if this die right here, I can collect that. Once again, I have to spend a drawn card, a drafted card, but I can take that die and it costs me 3 sway. if I wanted to take the card all the way up here, I would have to pay 3 sway and then put sway on each of these towards the other players. So it's possible that you can actually get to the point where you have a bunch of sway that's been stocked up, and whoever purchases this die also gets the sway that's sitting in these little circles as well. I thought that's pretty cool. And you'll actually, when you first roll your dice, you're going to be able to, each of the sides are going to be assigning the dice. So if it's something that's more important to, say, the player who has specific jurors, they may want to put those dice closer to them. Or it's also possible that you may want to take dice rolls that are more advantageous to your opponent and move them further away, so that they're going to have to spend a lot of sway to get those as well. The game does play pretty evenly. I did see the prosecution won more so than the defense. I am going to chalk that up to the players themselves as opposed to the actual design of the game. So that is, in essence, Unforgiven. So let's swing on over to the other camera. I will share my final thoughts. So let me grab a quick sip here. There we go. Wow, a lot of talking without taking a sip. So this is coming to Kickstarter. Once again, do want to point out I have received no compensation outside of the playtest copy of this game to provide you with my overall thoughts and opinion on Unforgiven. That said, we loved this game. I think this is an excellent, excellent game. For one, there's a great tug of war going on. And there's a lot of different ways for you to not only win the game, but also to try to keep things on your side, to keep, say, the prosecution moving forward or keeping the defense on their heels. Because you have to keep in mind that, number one, you're looking at being able to convince your jurors to go your way. You're also looking at the reasonable doubt track, pulling that back and forth. You also want to make sure that, hey, you're socking away some trial points as well, because it is possible for the game to go through all 3 phases and not have hit one of the 2 instant victory conditions. I love the fact that you're constantly balancing what do I look to am I trying to advance my cause? Or do I see a card that, wow, you know what? If my opponent drafts that card, they're going to put a hurt on me. So I'm going to draft that card and discard it to maybe get sway, or maybe to buy dice, or maybe if I've got the available resources to move the juror closer to me, closer to my side of the argument. There's a lot of stuff going on. So not only are you trying to tackle what you need to accomplish in order to get your jurors or to move that justice marker, you also have to keep in mind, a lot of times you're going to be drafting cards just to keep them away from your opponent. So, and there are ways to actually get cards from the discard pile too. So that's important to keep in mind. So there's a lot going on. There are all these little things going on, little mechanisms with the dice. I love the dice. I love how the dice are all, well, maybe not all different, but they're not all identical. So if you're purchasing a die, you're going to get that die face. Now you can pay sway and re-roll it, but the thing is, you have to take a look to see what's on that. If I need to say hearsay, I'm not going to buy a die that doesn't have hearsay on it. So I love that fact as well, that it's not just a bunch of dice that are all identical. There is just so much history baked into this as well. I got to say, Tom Butler and Greenfeet Games have taken a controversial yet, let's be honest, rarely remembered moment in American history and used it to inspire a uniquely tense and tightly designed standout. You're going to learn something playing this game. Now, granted, I'm a Civil War buff, so there's a lot of this that I already knew. But most people out there, sure, yes, they know John Wilkes Booth assassinated President Abraham Lincoln. And that's about the end of it. They don't realize that Mary Surratt was found guilty by the tribunal. In fact, some of the jurors had recommended to the president, Andrew Johnson, that she should not be executed, which either he didn't receive that or he ignored it or what have you. I believe he received it because there's a quote attributed to him that she owned the nest where the egg was hatched or something like that, if I remember correctly. But she was the first woman executed by the federal government. Actually, that trial is what led to the fact that if you are a civilian, you cannot be tried by a military tribunal. So there's a lot of things that came out of this trial. It's still very, very controversial to this day with people who are familiar with it. There are some who are on the side that Mary Surratt was guilty. She was a conspirator and she got her just desert, while others feel that she was wrongly persecuted simply because she was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and she did have Southern sympathies. I don't know. The truth may lie somewhere in the middle. We won't know. But I'll tell you what, you can reenact that trial with Unforgiven, the assassination trial, I should say the Lincoln Assassination Trial, which is coming to Kickstarter. And once again, I can't recommend this highly enough. We enjoyed it that much. I'm sad that I did not have an opportunity to play with my best friend, Elliot Miller, part of the gaming gang. He would just love this game. If you're a fan of, say, Twilight Struggle or 1960, even though mechanically they are different, if you are a fan of history games, definitely check this out. You don't have to have any interest in legalese or anything along those lines to really, really enjoy the tense back and forth, the tug of war that goes on in Unforgiven. Highly recommended. I can't give this a review score because it is a playtest copy. This is not the finished product. But I'll tell you what, if the component quality is anywhere near the component quality of the playtest, really top notch, really well done. All right, that is it for this time out. Once again, do want to point out, if you like this video, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, be sure to ring that notification bell, because not only will it let you know when I upload videos such as this, it'll also tell you when the Daily Dope streams live right here on YouTube, Monday through Thursday nights, as I bring you the latest in tabletop gaming news. Of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all latest in gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. All right, that's it for this time out. As I've been chiming off, pretty much signing out on my videos, unfortunately, during this pandemic, let me once again hope that you are being smart and staying safe. See you next time. Oh, you're still here. Well, once again, thank you very much for watching this video. And of course, if you'd like to subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel, click right here. And of course, if you want to see one of the latest episodes of the Daily Dope, click right on up here. And if you want to roll the dice, take your chances, see what YouTube thinks you might like from the channel, give a click right here. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer, and I'll see you next time.